Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Street League Drone Racing. I am here with my co-host. This is Lead Fingers, our resident engineer.
What's up, guys? Stoked to be here. Stoked to tell you what's going on for the next season of Street League.
Yeah, so we're going to be giving a quick recap of our season for 2022, and we're just super excited to talk about that. We're also going to talk a little bit about the rule book, some of the changes that are coming to that, and then we've got some really exciting, spicy stuff coming at the end of the live stream, which I'm very excited to share. So,
Yeah. So yeah, this can be great. So yeah, just to really start off, we just want to thank everyone who came and raced with us last year.
mhm.
We had such a good time. It exceeded all of our expectations. The season went great. And just thank you to all the pilots who came out and raced with us. We had almost 100 unique pilots come to the 6 races we ran last year. So I can't thank everyone individually, but if you came out and raced with us, thank you so much. And we look forward to racing with you next season.
Yeah, absolutely. This doesn't happen without the pilots. They're the ones ultimately putting on the show and making sure that we get to enjoy our time together. So, um, yeah, let's get into the season recap here real quick because it was a spicy first season for us. There was a lot that went on. So let's go ahead. I'm going to pull it up on our screen here for our wonderful viewers. So if you check out streetleague.io/races, you'll see all of our races from previous seasons, and we kind of have decided to make that the place to commemorate pilots who have competed and done well at some of our bigger races. So uh, race number one, Las Vegas. Talk me through that race because that was a really interesting race.
So Las Vegas was wild. It was our initial plan was to get there before noon, start practice at noon, just run practice till about 6 p.m. when the sun was going to set, and then run a full night race from 6 to midnight for the season race. And then literally we get a message at like 6 or 7 p.m. the night before, hey, the president is flying into town, which means there's a what is it?
No
No,
fly, VFR, I think,
a
or
VFR.
not
Yeah,
VFR. I forget what it was.
yeah.
Uh,
It's you're not allowed to fly.
yeah,
And this race was at an AMA field. So the AMA field is like, hey guys, you're done at this time. It was like 6 p.m. So it cut our race in half.
yeah,
Which was a whole thing to work through. But with what the equipment we had on hand, because everything was set up for a night race, so our gates weren't really optimized for flying during the day.
hmm
Um, we did the best we could. We put on the race. Everyone had a lot of fun. There's a lot of really good battles, lots of really, really good racing. Um, and we put on a good event, and everyone had a good time. It was a great race. It was not the way I would have wanted to kick off the season, but we got there.
yeah, and something to think about too. I think everyone on our staff, that was our first time hosting a race out of the state of Colorado, and
Mm-hmm.
so there was a lot of learning that went on there. But the pilots were really patient with us, which we appreciate. But
Mm-hmm.
um, more importantly, the race managed to happen, and we managed to declare our podium. So
Yeah.
Amari kind of set the tone for the season in this race. As you know, you can kind of see there's some spoilers. Just ignore those. But race number one, Amari really set the tone. It came down to a really epic battle between himself and Imperius. So Imperius really regards himself as a principled pilot, I think, and so he's been really big into spec racing and stuff, and he's been working really hard at it, and it definitely showed in race number one because he was there pushing on Amari in that final race. And there's a couple clips on our Discord of that race
Mm-hmm.
going down third person, and it's just beautiful to watch these guys work. And Amari came out on top, so
Yep.
hats off to Imperius for putting the pressure on him. But
Oh yeah.
Amari
That was
definitely
not a
set the
free
tone.
win.
Yeah,
That was he had to work for that. Imperius really um, had a lot of really good battles with Amari this season.
yeah,
You never count Imperius out.
yeah, and that was, Amari was hot off a season on DRL, so like
Mm-hmm.
he is not a slouch when it comes to 7-inch racing with heavier quads. And
Hmm.
then Z-Stone also, I think he has somewhat of a background in X-Class racing, so I think
Yes.
that really helped him in
Hmm.
this first event because he showed up to play, and we've seen him been competing really well at a high level for pretty much the entire season. So
Yeah, and he puts in a lot of work. He is probably if you took age and finishing order in like even open class racing, I
yeah,
think Z Stone is the fastest old guy out there.
yeah,
And I don't mean that in a bad way. We love Z Stone. He's a great guy.
yeah.
But that dude puts in a lot of work to go as fast as he goes. And even like we saw him again at Cali Clash and he was
Hmm.
still right there.
Yep. Super fast. Super fun
Hmm.
guy to be around too. Just a joy to
Hmm.
be with. Um,
Yeah.
so race number two, we kind of roll in. So this was held in Florida at the ranch. They were kind enough to
Hmm.
put us up for a race, and huge shout out to Matt and Michelle for that. But
Yep.
this
No
is
Quarter Ranch,
where
best place to fly FPV in the country.
it's
It's
FPV heaven.
amazing.
Yeah.
It is FPV heaven. They have an amazing facility there,
And
and they're so welcoming, and they love drone racing and facilitating drone racing, and it's just so nice to be able to go and work with them.
yeah, the love that goes into the pilots at that facility is just amazing. They've hosted so many really awesome races. Just finished the MultiGP championship there,
Hmm.
which was absolutely awesome. I was glued to the live stream the entire time, so that was super
Hmm.
fun. Um, but yeah, so kind of the locals there. I mean, this almost is a little bit like the story of Amari traveling around the world, right? Um,
Yeah.
because I think he's just got a big love for spec and stock and all that type of racing. But he ran into some really tough competition here. I would dare to say, um,
Hmm.
Engineer and Hyper. So Engineer and Hyper are easily the fastest two pilots locally in Florida, in my opinion, um, and
And
uh, top
they're the
1% of pilots
fast
easily in the world.
on any. If you put those two guys up against any pilots in the whole world, they could come out on top on any given day.
Yeah, doesn't
Like
matter who they're racing.
doesn't matter who they're racing. They are some of the fastest guys in the world
Yeah,
for
so
sure.
we had the pleasure
Hmm.
of watching that race, and oh my gosh, was it great!
Dude,
Um,
it delivered on throughout the whole day, through points rounds. It
mhm.
delivered. We had photo finishes all day throughout the whole field, and then moving into the Elite Eight, there was amazing racing. I had a really good race with Infinity and Manny in the
Yeah,
Elite Eight, where we were grinding props. All three of us were grinding props for a full half a lap before someone finally went down. And even then, we only spun out for a second, got right back into the race. It
yeah.
was just some of the best racing we had all season.
That's what it's all about. Is
Yeah.
those really awesome moments where your adrenaline's pumping and you're just pinned on the throttle. I love it. And um, yeah, and so we see Hyper and Engineer. They finish out second, and well, Engineer in second, Hyper in third. Now this was the first
Hmm.
event where we saw people start to really make an attempt at pushing the spec and kind of pushing on the rule
Hmm.
book and seeing how resilient is this rule book. So we had our first major like uh, I would say breakthrough in terms of the spirit of the rules, right? Where it's obvious that
Oh
this is
yeah.
not what we intended.
Hmm.
But the pilots are going to find every little nook and cranny, and they're going to work those. And to us, that's not so much a problem, right?
No.
We tend to be we tend to be willing to sort of not quite reward people for that in particular, but we allow them to show where we could have improved and then we
Hmm.
improve. And so I think that
Yeah.
establishes a really good relationship of being open and honest about where we can improve it as an organization, and the pilots make sure to push us on that. So
Yeah.
we're not too worried about that.
So we'll mention it when we go through the rule book, but that's where the Amari clause comes from, that the motors and the props have to be spinning the same speed under normal operation.
Yep. So
Because
that,
we regulate motor RPM, and Amari
hmm
goes, well, they never said anything about propeller RPM, just
hmm
motor. So what if I just gear up my propellers? And
yep.
he just made a
Yeah.
gearbox one. It was insane.
So
It was
the
ridiculous.
infamous gear quad came into being. Engineer also came up with a really unique design, and we didn't end up outright banning this design, but it did
Hmm.
completely make us rethink um, some of the rules we have surrounding the arm thickness and whatnot, because
Mhm.
uh, we find it to be pretty important that the quads are enjoyable to fly, that you would actually want to live with this thing. Um,
Mhm.
and so that's kind of where that came from. He had the tube arm quad with
Yep.
sand in the arms, and
Sand.
gosh, it flew
The sand
amazing.
was amazing.
It
The
was really
sand,
cool.
he didn't need any filters with sand in his arms.
Yeah,
We're all like, he just did it for weight, and then he goes to black box log it, and he's like,
it's a
why is there
flat
no
line.
noise?
There
It was a
was
flat,
no noise. It's completely
which was
gone.
so, which was super cool. But as soon as he crashed it, it exploded and pocket sanded the whole track. um, so that's where, because we just had a perimeter rule for the arms at that point. They had to be so big around,
Hmm.
and but we didn't have the area rule at that point. So we added in
Right.
the area rule to make sure that every quad or every frame that's legal in Street League should be durable.
Yeah.
The you should not be breaking arms all the time.
Or
You
at
should be
very
able to
least, yeah, you should be able to make it durable. Like if
yeah,
it's
you
not
there
durable, it's going to be on you.
yeah, we don't regulate bad ideas. But
Yeah.
you could make a very very fast quad, and like these arms that I fly, which are a little skinny here, one set full season.
Yeah. And
Good to go.
that's awesome.
I didn't even bring spares to the races with me. There was no
Yeah,
reason to.
that was a really weird thing too. Is like these first two races were kind of the first time. Like I think Amari built two quads. Um,
Hmm.
I think well, so this race actually he took one of those quads and made it his gear quad, and then he ended up only running one quad all race, if I remember
Hmm.
correctly. So that's
Yeah,
kind
he
of been
did
the standard.
an ESC swap
Mm,
at that race because he had an ESC that just one channel started randomly burning motors,
mm,
which is rare but happens.
yeah,
And he's like, "I need an ESC," and I'm like, "Dude, I got the first ESC I ever bought, and it's just my spare. Here you go." And he's like, "Oh, it's got Spirit. I love this grass stains on it and stuff." And he put that Hobby Wing 60 amp in his quad, and I think he flew it until champs. I think he had a fresh stack for champs,
yeah,
but the same ESC ran him all season. And like I'm running the same ESC. I put a new one in for this season, but we flew Street League locally the year before, and like
hmm
the one I flew the year before is my spare.
yeah,
So like I haven't burned any ESCs or anything like that. The quads just work.
yeah.
Um,
It's great, honestly.
and this event, the Citrus Springs one, was also like a 3-day event. We had a full setup and fun fly day, and then a full practice day, and then a full race day, which
Hmm.
was amazing. I think the 3-day events, we'd love to try to get them, but they're a little bit harder to come by. But I think what we really learned from this and the rest of our season, as much as the season went great, is for 2023, to the best of our ability, Street League official races will be 2-day events.
Yeah, I think
That's what
that's
we're trying
really
to do.
the ideal.
We got a day for practice, practice the track, race with your buddies. We'll usually do a mock race at that point where we start doing organized practice, where it is essentially the same thing as points rounds that you'll be doing during the official race, just to get everyone used to that. And it's just fun. Points rounds are fun.
Yeah,
Points rounds are some of the most fun racing you'll ever do.
that's where
So
all the
we
photo
love doing
finishes come
that.
from.
Yeah, and then we'll have another full day of racing. So that means we don't have to race for 16 hours in a day because
Yeah,
it's grueling by the end of it. It would be really nice to start at noon and then end at midnight.
yeah. Um, so let's move on. So race number three, Cali Clash. So we're
Hmm.
starting to see the trend here, right? Maybe Amari two times is a fluke, and
Hmm.
then Cali Clash. So um, yeah, talk me through the Cali Clash event.
So Cali Clash was the first time that we plugged in to another organization who's running their own event, and they were like, "Hey, we would love for you to guys to come and run a street league race during our event. Will you do that?" And we said, "Of course we will." And we loved it because the field was all figured out, and the gates were all figured out, and the power and like the event was set up, which is great. And then the people who were actually running the event really enjoyed it because
Hmm.
they had a full day where they didn't have to do anything.
Yeah,
They
they just kind of sit back and
yeah.
most of them raced. So
Yeah, and they all raced. So the people who were race directing for the Freedom Spec and the Open Class race that weekend had a day during the event where they could just hang out
yeah,
and like enjoy themselves as a racer. And like we were able to provide that for those race organizers, which we appreciate. And then when they were running their event, we got to fly.
yeah.
So like
So
that was cool.
that was super
Um,
cool. And Carl's Body Shop was our
oh
host
yeah.
there, and oh my gosh, the dude went to the ends of the earth for us. So that,
Hmm.
huge shout out to him. Um, Drone pilots, if you don't appreciate the guy who maintains whatever piece of land that you get to fly on, go buy him a beer or something. Make sure
Yeah.
they feel loved and appreciated because they do so much for us.
Yeah.
But yeah,
And
so
but
this
the
race, uh,
track was amazing. Um, really well lit, crazy course. The California guys put on the craziest tracks.
mm-hmm,
They go so much harder than most of the other places. Like
it's
when we
true.
don't set tracks like that on the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so the
And
racing was really, really good, really, really close all day.
yeah, the field
Um,
was tough again, right? This is very
really deep.
similar to Florida. You have big hitters like Engineer and Hyper, and then again on your podium, you're going to see some of those big hitters again. You're going to see SFPV, you're going to see
Hmm.
Miwo, a DRL pilot, and a literally everything else competitive pilot,
Yeah,
right? Um,
good at everything.
yeah, so SFPV, he's again coming from sort of those X-class drones, so
Hmm.
he's familiar with those. Does a lot of film stuff. Just all around very experienced and fast pilot. So Amari runs into them, and we got another showdown right at the end. One of the favorite things about our one of my favorite things about our format is that it always comes down to a 1v1. That's
Hmm.
how it always ends. It comes down to a 1v1 where you decide who the better pilot is. And there's a
Hmm.
lot of mental games that go into that, and it seems that Amari really thrives under that pressure. The more pressure you put him under, I think the better he
Hmm.
does, and you kind of see that throughout the season. But it came down to Amari versus SFPV, and
Hmm.
it was a show. It was a battle, and that was just so much fun to watch.
Yeah. And yeah, after there, and then like we that was the first race we brought champagne to, so everyone's spraying
Yeah.
champagne at the end of it, and the podium's going nuts, and yeah, we just had an amazing time running that race. I had an amazing time racing in it. It was uh m- me, so there was those three, and then I ended up fourth that race. I was the first one knocked out of the final four.
Mhm.
And then we had uh Z Stone, uh Din, JFK, Orange Stuff, I think for the next one. I think Ferry was like maybe right there as well. Like we had um, a really tight pack from like 10th up was
Mhm.
everybody could have been in that top eight and could have, I could have made that final four. Like
Mhm.
it was really, really tight racing the whole day.
Yeah, it was such good racing. I really enjoyed
Hmm.
the Cali Clash race. And then we had sort of impromptu race really. We get a phone call from Sean Ames, the father of spec racing himself, and
Hmm.
uh, and he's like, "Well, I'm hosting the Freedom Spec race that I do every 4th of July. Do you guys want to join?" And we're like, "This is the greatest crossover of all time, right?
Yeah.
You've got the two predominant spec racing leagues that exist collaborating, and like what better event could exist, right? What better collaboration could exist, in my opinion? Um,
Yeah. And it was amazing working with Sean for this race.
yeah.
If you ever have an opportunity to go to one of Sean's races, or better yet, to collaborate with him to run a big event, do it because he just runs such an amazing event, and all the infrastructure is all there exactly how you need it, and the timers and pilot safety and race line and the field and just he's so good at setting these events up. They're a pleasure to go to, and it's a pleasure working with them.
Hmm.
And we just had an awesome weekend. It was so cool being able to race all the street league drones, and then being able to race the Freedom Spec drones, and how the drones are significantly different, and
Hmm.
how we set up the tracks are different between the two leagues.
I'll say that
And it,
they're even more similar though than like open class, which is really
oh yeah.
nice.
But it's like it's it's really fun to be able to go do both in one weekend. It was just we had a great time with it.
Yeah, I think the technicalities of how you perform well at each of the different specs is very different.
Hmm.
But really cool thing is that the spirit for both of them is exactly the same, and it's the best thing ever. The spirit and just the vibes, if you will, just
Hmm.
it's so good. We had a blast. We had guys shooting quads with Orbeez when they're coming to the landing zone, and just it was just such a good time.
Yep.
So
Spiking drones, tumbling them.
yeah, it was
Uh, it was great.
so great.
And the racing, like this was our first mix-up of the season too, where
Hmm.
like Amari wasn't on the top spot. He was still the guy to beat all
Yeah,
day.
that's true.
Um, but yeah, we were all racing. We got a lot of racing in Moberly. We did 12 rounds of points rounds, and I
Hmm.
think we from that race we learned that that's too many.
Yeah,
You
that
get
was a lot.
too settled into your position
Hmm.
where there's big enough gaps between people where like I skipped the 12th race literally,
Hmm.
and I dropped one position in
Right.
the ranking, and I did it strategically because I thought that would be a better place to be to go into the Elite Eight.
Yeah.
um, but I shouldn't have been able to do that, and the fact
Okay.
that I could means that there was something that had to change. And I think what we learned is that like we should probably end points rounds around 10.
Yeah.
um,
I think that
because
makes a lot of sense.
yeah, because I didn't you didn't have to race after that, and it was everyone got so settled in. Where like at champs, I went from A heat to C heat with a single bad lap. um, but we ran 8 rounds at champs. We didn't
Hmm.
run 12.
Yeah, I think somewhere between like 8 and 10 is sort of what we started learning at this point, and like
Hmm.
just kind of come back to it like um this season, especially since it's our first season, right? We knew going into it that the pilots were going to show us things that we didn't yet understand, right? There are going to be
Hmm.
things that they figure out, and then we're going to have to learn them right after they figure it out, and make sure that either it needs to be addressed or it's the way it should be,
Hmm.
and it needs to be left. And so we've been learning kind of through that whole process. And so this race was really interesting. We had our first like situation where we're like, okay, let's re-examine how we're doing all of the motor output and stuff like that, which we're going to be getting
Hmm.
into here in a little bit
Yeah,
on the
we got
live
some
stream.
big news for
We
that.
got some big news for that, so
Yeah,
definitely stick around for that.
but
But this was
but
where we kind of saw that get pushed.
yeah. But let's run down this podium real quick because I know these guys all,
I'm sure you're
everyone
excited
deserves
too.
to. I know I get my first shout out of the season. I'm
Yeah,
stoked about
so
that. But really, like Imperius and Adrone were really flying well all day, and I
yeah,
know Imperius was at Vegas and he was at Citrus Springs, um, and he couldn't make Cali Clash, but he was there for this one and had been right, you know,
yeah,
battling with the top guys the whole time, and for him to finally put that together and get that top spot at the podium, I know it was special for us just to watch it, be a
yeah,
part of that, but it was so special for him to finally have that race come together for him, and it was
yeah.
amazing.
And I would say too, like Imperius, I feel like he put everything together in Vegas that he
Hmm.
had to put together, right? And then
Hmm.
like he just barely lost out to Amari, and he got
Yeah.
really hungry at that point.
Hmm.
And then Citrus Springs just straight up did not go well for him. He was
Yeah.
having technical issues on top of just the timing of things just did not work out for him. And
Hmm.
then this race, he put it together again, but I think he came to the table with a lot more to put together. And
Yeah.
so it really speaks to him, like as a pilot, to be mentally resilient in that way, because it's very
Hmm.
easy to sort of see your finishing position and be like, okay, well, this is where I'm at. But no, he really came to do a burnout, and he did a burnout right
Yeah.
up to the top of the podium. And then I
And
should speak also to Adrian, because
Adrone.
I think
Yeah.
the reason why Imperius's win is so impressive is because of Adrian.
Hmm.
Because Adrian had been absolutely, like, he had been flying during that event.
So good.
It was to the point where people are like, is his quad faster? And
Yeah.
I don't know if it was. I don't know if it wasn't. I
Not.
do know what RPM his motors were spinning at. We know like
Hmm.
what we do know, but he was also flying the heck out of it, even if the quad was performing well for him. And it was a stock prig too,
Yeah,
so it
it's
was
not like
not a
he
very
showed up with
aero.
something crazy. He
Hmm.
showed up with the Project 399
Yeah,
frame and some Brother Hobby motors and a spare ESC that he had chilling in his house,
every
and
single
he threw
part
the
on his
quad
quad was
together.
used.
Yeah, it was all he just threw it together and then showed up and was killing it. And
Hmm.
every time we saw him for the rest of the season, he just flies that good. He is
Yeah.
just that good of a pilot. Is
Yeah.
he is amazing, and he's the super nice guy, and it's a
Yeah.
pleasure having him at the races. So
If you
like,
see him at any other event, it's probably
yeah.
going to be spotting someone, helping someone
Hmm.
out. Like that's I love that so much.
Yeah.
That those are the types of pilots that selfishly I really want to be on the top of the podium. And
Yeah.
then selfishly again, I was super stoked to see you snag the third place in that race. So you had been top eight in all of the races leading
Hmm.
up to this, and you knew that like you wanted to get top eight or better,
Yeah.
and this race it was a little bit more than just top eight.
Yeah, even better. So yeah, so I got top eight, and then kind of was nervous in Vegas, but so made Elite Eight, and then got nervous, missed a flag, got knocked out, whatever. But I was like, I want to make. I liked being in Elite Eight. I want to make Elite Eight all season. That's my goal.
Mhm.
So I did it in the first race in Vegas, and then Citrus Springs, I did it again on the eighth spot, right on the bubble, and then the me, Manny, and Infinity had an amazing race to try to get
Yeah.
into the final four, and that Manny came out on top with, but like grinding props, all three of us just in each other's faces. We had an amazing race, so that was that. I didn't make final four, but it still felt good. I was like, yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah.
And then Cali Clash actually made it into the final four, which was like, oh, awesome. Like I got one more step. But for me, as soon as I make that Elite Eight, I've already won.
Mhm.
So I just get to fly after that because I don't really mind how I
You
do
just
after
took the
that because
gloves off at that point. You're like,
yeah,
let's
it's
just go for it.
let's just send it. And then in Moberly, yeah, really like I was flying really well all day, consistent on my lines. The quad felt good. I knew exactly what was happening to it.
Mhm.
Like everything was that was I think Moberly was the best I've flown all season really.
Yeah, I think so.
Um I felt the best and yeah, so I get into I'm looking at the we're in the 12th round and I'm looking at the points and I'm looking at the two Elite 8 rounds, the semifinal rounds, and I realize I don't want to be in the Elite 8 round that I'm in right now.
Mhm.
I think that's the harder one. So I actually skipped the 12th points round. It dropped me. It only dropped me one position, which is why I say like we probably shouldn't do 12 points rounds again because
Yeah.
it should have dropped me more. I shouldn't be able to do the thing that I did.
Mhm.
Um, and not because it's not allowed, but because
Yeah.
it shouldn't be advantageous.
Yeah, it was the first situation we ran into as an organization where
Mm-hmm.
anybody found a way to sandbag, and it was you like in the moment you figured it out. And I remember as an announcer, we go into that last round. You had your quad set up,
Oh
and
yeah,
I'm
I didn't
like,
tell anyone because it would have caused a shitstorm
he
if
didn't
I would
tell
have been like, I'm not
anybody.
racing. I'm just sitting there, and as soon as the race starts, I flip my pit switch and I stand up, and
Yeah.
Imperious was behind me, and he goes, "What happened? Your quad didn't start?" I go, "No, I got to choose my semifinal heat," and he
Right.
goes, "Oh."
And the fastest pilots get to race last, which means they have a better understanding of where the field's at, and so that's sort of the advantage you get for doing better. So you took full
Yeah.
advantage of it, and
Hmm.
I'd say it worked out for you. I definitely
It
think it
did.
worked out.
So I ended up in the semifinals that one I was chasing Adrone, and I kind of figured I think it was me, Adrone, J Box, and I can't remember who the fourth guy in the heat was. I think it might have been Sean.
It may have been
Um,
Sean, I think it
I think it was
was.
Sean, but Sean was a little bit unfamiliar with Street League drones at that point. You can see later in the season he got way more familiar,
Well,
but
yeah, and we learned a lot. I'll get back
we
to
learned
that.
a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I was like, all right, I'm gonna chase A drone, keep him honest, and then me and J Box are gonna battle for this last spot. Like that was
Mhm.
really the plan in my head. And A drone just happened to make a mistake the first round and let me get through to the finals right from in the beginning.
Mhm.
And then I just did my and then in the final four, I think Amari had put a practice battery on instead of a race battery, or there was something happening. But I just flew 110%. Wasn't sure if I was going to finish. Be able to. I was going to crash. It was maybe a 50% chance I finished the race. I
Mhm.
was flying. I was so hard, and it just worked out. So like I was happy with it.
Yeah. And like, let's talk a little bit about Sean there too, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
Sean came in and he kind of came to the table with a quad that mainly it was the motors, and we kind of learned from that event that not all motors are created equal, which we knew going into it,
You
but at the
know.
same time we didn't know like to what degree, like how much smaller of a
Yeah.
motor. makes a difference or doesn't. Because
Hmm.
up until then, all the motors that had existed had performed pretty much identically. And
Yeah.
so uh, he ended up going in with some motors that like weren't quite as big as the other motors, and it ended up, I think, affecting the performance of the drone. In addition to like, there could have been like some ESC settings that maybe would have
Yeah.
helped him, but
Well, it was just the whole package kind of because like you
yeah,
can see later in the season there is a person racing who just grabs a quad and goes out and flies it, and then there's a person racing who has been doing their homework, making
yeah,
sure the quad and the tune and the motors and the batteries and the settings and practicing with
yeah,
it. And like you can see that's two totally different pilots. So like
hmm,
winning a race isn't just showing up to the race; it is all the work you put in beforehand.
yeah,
And I think um, we'll see in the next two in DITD and champs, like that's what it looks like when Sean starts doing his homework.
yeah.
Oh my God, so fast.
Yeah, and
Cha-
like the difference in like motors and the frames and stuff, that's something again we're gonna announce some fun stuff here that should really help with that. I think there's always gonna be an element of, like you said, you're gonna have to work on the quad. You're gonna have to understand how it works to the same degree that you would uh, in any type of racing. But um, I think the impact that it's going to have is going to be a lot less. So I'm very
Mhm.
excited for that.
Yeah,
But let's move on. So next race we've got going here, that's going to be drones in the desert. So like you said, we saw Sean show up at this race,
yeah,
right? We saw Sean put out in a big way,
yeah.
um, and really demonstrate like, look, I'm not just the father of spec racing. I'm gonna be the daddy of this race, and he just absolutely sent it.
Yeah,
Um,
he was the guy to beat all day.
he was the guy to beat. He
All day.
showed up. And I think he
Yeah.
was swapping back and forth between the 533 Spec 7 and
Hmm.
his own frame,
Yeah,
the,
the
the
flying shame.
the Flying Shame. It was a really interesting concept, right? Because
Hmm.
Sean's like, how can I do things the cheapest and best at all times? Like Sean is always
Hmm.
thinking about that. And so he came up with the concept of what do we really call it? Like layering,
So I
stacked
call it
arms.
the stacked arm. So yeah, he wanted to have a 12 by 12 square arm. Meets all the rules. It's actually a little bigger than you need.
Mhm.
Um, and he like, I want to do that. I think that's going to be the best thing. And then
Mhm.
he looked at the price of 12 mil carbon and was like, oh my God, it's too much.
Mhm.
But then he said, well, why don't I just cut it out of 6 mil carbon? We're all already doing it, and I'll just put eight. I'll just stack the two arms on top of each other, and I got a 12 mil arm.
Yeah.
And
And
he came out with that, and like we kind of all saw it, and it's one of the things, once you see it done, it's so obvious that we should have
mhm.
been doing it.
Yeah. And so he kind of brought that to the table in addition
Hmm.
to just really like, I think he went to town on that quad. Like he made sure not only was it
Hmm.
running really good, but he put packs on it and he made sure he was like really prepared for this race, and he showed up. And then for yourself, this was a big step up, right? Because you were pretty stoked about the first podium that you grabbed in
Hmm.
race number 4, but this was where you brought in um, a second place. So
Yeah.
that's pretty cool for you.
Um,
And
it,
you had to beat Free for that spot. How did that go for you?
dude, Free. I honestly think between me and Free at that race, Free had the edge. I happened to be the guy who came up on top when it
Hmm.
mattered to get that second. But I think we would have raced 10 times. I think he would have won 6 of those. I think he had the edge on me that day. He had a plus configuration uh, prig frame
Hmm.
that he was flying, which is he was the first one to fly the plus, and we're all like, oh my god, it's so fast! Like this is super cool.
Yeah.
And I came out with the froggy arms before that for this race, which is the skinny bit
Hmm.
right here, and then it gets fat over here. We call that the froggy arm. So it was the froggy Kari versus the flying shame versus the free plus prig. Um, and yeah, we had a great race, and it was again a really hard fought and
Yeah.
just so much fun battling. We
Yeah,
just
and,
had a
and
great time
as
battling.
far as events go too, it was really exciting because we held this race on a campus, the Mesa
Mesa.
University, and it was super exciting because we're hosting this drone race and it's on their football field, and at some point, a lot of the students from the dormitories just started coming down
Yeah,
and hanging out in the bleachers, and next thing you
yeah.
know, there was a point at which where I'm commentating and I'm like, oh, like I know there's a couple people here, like let's get them a little raz. I'm like, and it was really dark over there, so I
You
couldn't
couldn't
quite
see.
make out how many people there were, but like how you guys doing tonight? And I think it was like 100 people almost just start cheering, and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, there's 100 people here watching us drone race,
Yeah.
and we had no idea. We're just out in the field
Hmm.
having fun, like doing our thing, but what we're doing is actually like enjoyable to watch, and so that just speaks volumes to the pilots. Like um, they've just been they're so entertaining to watch. They're so well practiced,
Hmm.
and yeah, that was a really cool experience. And then yeah, the podium just it was hard fought all the way around. It was a great
Hmm.
race and great event, and so that leads us to the
The
championship.
championship.
Actually,
So,
real quick, before we get to the championship, we should probably kind of note because there were some really interesting things that we tried for our season that have never been done in drone racing, and as far as I understand, I don't think they've ever been tried in sporting. So what we did for our season is we represented our season points using a cryptocurrency. And the unique part about that is that you get to um, trade. You can trade your currency for other assets. You can
hmm.
buy it. You can do anything that you want. You truly own your season points. And so the question becomes, okay, so you're saying I can just buy season points? And they're like, well, you can't buy it from us, but you can buy it from pilots. And so this was a really unique opportunity for us to help pilots be able to um, promote themselves, really. And so essentially what this meant was that there's a cutoff date, and at that
Hmm.
cutoff date, we're going to go and we're going to reference the blockchain, and we're going to say who owns the most street cred. That's the first guy that's getting a call for champs. Who owns the
Hmm.
next amount of street cred? That's the next guy we call for champs. And so, but but what that also meant was that there was going to be a bidding war at the 11th hour, and oh boy, was there a bidding war at the 11th hour. And what's interesting is,
Why don't you pull up that screen?
yeah, let me
So
see
let,
if
let people.
I can find it.
Well, no, just
Here
our
we go.
thing at the
So
end. They're staring at our two faces right now. They can't see.
yeah, 1 second. So here we go. This is our final standings for the bidding war. So this was the state of the blockchain on that date. These were your top 16, and so you actually ended up on top because I think you kind of saw it coming. Like,
Yeah,
walk
I
me through
saw.
that night, how that went for you.
I was pretty close to the top. Um, and like I knew it. I think I was number 2 or 3 at this point.
Hmm.
Just from consistently doing good at all of the races, because I raced in every race this season. And then I saw Amari sold some of his off,
Hmm.
uh, and then I was like, well, I could sell some of mine off, or I could have the top spot on that leaderboard. And I went for the top spot. I just wanted to be up there.
Yeah, and that was a really interesting thing too. You had a bunch of different incentives kind of come. The invisible hand of the market really actually worked quite well. So Amari had excess points, and he was like, "Oh, I'm fine converting some of those into capital," and so he did, and that was kind of cool. Like I got a phone call from Amari. He's like, "I just paid rent with crypto. I paid rent with my season points," and that's a really big thing for us because we hope that
Mm.
we're able to promote pilots financially and otherwise eventually. But um, it was super cool to see how that played out, and it also meant that some of the pilots who attended season races. They were able to cash in on season points. So even if
Hmm.
they didn't finish like top 3, top 8, like a lot of those pilots were able to sell their street cred either for crypto or whatever asset they chose, really.
Quad parts.
Quad parts,
Some people
all
did
sorts of
money, but
trades
and
happened.
like that does allow people to buy their way into champs, which isn't ideal, like
Yeah.
right, as for a series. However, the only way to buy your way into champs is to pay the people who did go to season races.
And if they
So
choose to block you out, there's nothing you can do.
yeah, you
So
can't force them to sell it to you. It's just if they want to, they said, "Hey, I went to a couple races. I'm not going to champs. Um, I'm happy to sell my season points off, and whether you get quad parts or is it if it's cold hard cash or whatever that deal is, it has nothing to do with us. But
yeah,
the only way to mint street cred is to go race and to beat other pilots.
Yep.
That is the only way to get it.
Hmm.
What you do with it from then on is up to you,
Yeah.
really, at
And
the end of the day.
and it was really fun to see the pilots be able to get their value out of it. And just so that everyone knows, season two of Street Cred is only applicable for season two. Season one of Street
Hmm.
Cred is only applicable for season one, so there's
Yeah.
not going to be rollover from the previous season. But we did really see like pilots who wanted to get to champs. They either attended races or they paid a lot extra, honestly, for the ticket.
Hmm.
So really, it was much cheaper, I think, to just um,
Go
come
to
to
the
a couple
race.
races and do decently than it would be because the price of street cred was a decent chunk of change. So
Hmm.
yeah, so we get to that point and we see some really interesting names start to pop up on this leaderboard. So we see Alex FPV managed to get his way in, just barely scraping past the bits, and sneaking on in there. And then we also see Heads Up in the second
Hmm.
place position. He grabbed a ton of street cred for himself and got
Hmm.
his way into champs as well. NM
We had
Grower, although
Grower.
he didn't actually show up.
No, he
Um,
couldn't make it, so that's why we had um, one alternate, which was the number 17, which was Nitro Toker. Ended up coming
right.
in, and then we had one more person who couldn't make it.
Nightwing was not able to
Nightwing
make it
couldn't make
last
it.
minute as well, and so we held a exhibition race. Well, initially it was an exhibition race, and then we had
Hmm.
some pilots not show up. So our thing was let's fill that championship with the exhibition races,
Yeah.
and
So we
we
had one
saw,
spot. It was the
yeah,
winner of the exhibition race, got at the 16th seed into champs.
yeah, and I'm almost inclined to just make that the way it is because gosh, that was fun.
It
Um,
was super cool.
it came down to Screecher versus K Mead, and
Hmm.
first of all, it was really fun to see Kami get back into drone racing. Um,
Yeah.
super cool guy. Really enjoyed racing with him back in the day. But um, and then Screecher, who's been this like up and coming force in the MultiGP world, and he
Hmm.
came in and just flew his heart out in the final heat.
Hmm.
They touched props. I think like 3 or 4 times. We have the heat
Yeah.
posted on our Facebook. It's worth
Yeah.
watching.
It's on
So
our
much fun.
Facebook. I think it's on the HQ Prop Facebook. Like that thing's been shared around because it's an
Yeah.
amazing race to watch.
It's such a good race. Like that's why we do this, is for races like
Hmm.
that. And so then that rounded out our championship participants.
Hmm.
So rolling into champs, we got to host this at Flight Test, and
Hmm.
that was an incredible volume. Just and the Flight Test crew is just so welcoming and like,
Hmm.
oh my gosh, I couldn't have asked for a better host. They were
Yeah.
just
It was.
incredible to us.
It was so cool, and then we also had help from the local groups who are flying out there for to get gates and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So really, the Cleveland Quad Squad came in clutch, helping us out with gate materials
Yeah.
and all of those sorts of things, and helping us make that contact with Flight Test. And then Flight Test, we're like, hey, this is a thing we want to do. Um, we're like, oh, that's awesome. We love it. What can we do to help? Um, and then all the pilots showed up in force. We had our 16 for champs, and I think we had almost another 20 in in locals for the exhibition race who hadn't raced Street League before.
Hmm.
And yeah, it was just an amazing event. We had so much fun. We're gonna hopefully work with Flight Test. We're gonna continue to work with them in the future because it was excellent.
Yeah, it was just such a good experience, and let's go ahead and see if I can pull up our podium from that race. So podium from that race, these were your results.
The
Um,
exhibition.
oh no, from the championship. So the
Oh shit.
championship was a roller coaster, right? It was all the top guys. They're there. They're battling it out. And what was really cool is it was the top guys, not even just that had participated in the season, but I think with the addition of Evan and Alex FPV being there, like those are the top guys. You've got several DRL pilots there. You've got several veterans of grassroots racing leagues like MultiGP, as well as Freedom Spec. You have the father of Freedom Spec there. It was just an absolute brawl. And you were talking
Mhm.
earlier about like you have one bad heat and it puts you back. It puts you
Yeah,
really
I
far
had a
back.
bad lap. I had a single bad lap where I hit a gate and then recovered and came back, and I went from the ranked fourth in points to ranked ninth in points in one mistake. So I went from A heat to C heat. Like it
That's
was that tight the whole way up. Nobody knew who was going to end up in the Elite Eight.
yeah, it was such a crazy wild event, and everybody was racing their hearts out. So that was so cool to watch. And ultimately it came down to our top four in the top four race. So that was Amari, Heads Up, Shames, and Adrone made it into the top four, and it was just the gloves were off at that point. Like these
Hmm.
guys were racing their hearts out. Actually, before that, it was really interesting, right? Because we see this theme of like Amari going into that, and everyone's like, is Amari the guy to beat, or is it going to be Heads Up, right? The
Hmm.
kid is just magic on the sticks. He's one of the best in the drone racing game, and he was the current DRL champion at the time. So it's like how is Amari going to be able to beat this guy, right? And then you've got
Hmm.
all the other really fast pilots there too. And Amari had a couple missteps during the earlier parts of the day, right? You're saying like, oh, you have a bad lap, you get set back, and it was to the point where Amari was struggling to stay in it in the top eight to get into the opportunity to win the event. Um, and he had me sweating because like I got a little bit of partial. I was like, oh man, Amari, like he's the guy,
He's
and then
yeah.
seeing him stumble was like really jarring, I think.
Hmm. So we got a question in the live stream. 533 Mondo is asking about like he heard that there was some spec checking drama that happened during the race and just what
Yeah.
happened with that.
So,
So what I got a nice rundown because I was really in it for a lot of this. So we had a pilot who came to us about halfway through the event like, hey, I've changed some things, whatever. I would like you to respec check my drone, which
mhm.
we will always help pilots um, help them be in spec. If you
Yeah.
ever come to us at a race like, hey, can you help me with my drone to make sure that everything's good? We will always say yes. And because you're coming to us,
Yeah. You're not going to get
there's
accused
no
of anything if
penalization
you
for that.
come
Yeah,
to us.
if you come to us, because we are assisting you. So and we ran the spec check. Everything looked fine. Set up the drone. Then later in the event, um, one of the pilots calls him out and says, "Hey, I'm spec checking you," which pilots
Yeah.
are
It's
perfectly allowed to
within the
do.
rule
You're
book.
allowed to, that's within the rule book. So we spec check them, and the the settings that were set on the drone were exactly what we had set earlier in the day when we checked it.
Mhm.
Um, but the settings that we're getting through the spec checker now that we should set it to were now different.
Yeah.
Um, and that was
The
crazy.
settings
We had
the settings were the same. The drone did not pass the spec check the
yes
second
with the
time,
same
and it was
settings.
by a large margin. So the
Yeah, it was
drone in that
significant.
heat genuinely was going faster, and we saw that
Hmm.
kind of in the heat to the point where the
Yeah,
pilot was willing to go call him out.
yeah. So we were, but it's not like we set them at 90% motor output and they changed it to 95. No, they were at the number we set them to. So we're
Hmm.
like, there was enough question there, like did the spec checker mess up earlier in the day or what happened? There was enough question that we gave everyone the benefit of the doubt, and we asked all the pilots involved, and we said, "Hey, how do you guys feel about doing a race off and or rerunning that heat as a race off? We respec checked everybody, everyone's good. You want to do that?" And they said yes. And we
Hmm.
said, "Okay, go have your race off." And they did that, and that's more or less where it ended. Um, and we actually that was one of the reasons that right after we finish up this wrap up, we're moving on to the next thing, which is going to fix that for next year. That
Yeah.
situation cannot happen again next year.
Yeah, that was
We
a
have
super
fixed it.
tough situation for like us
Hmm.
as an organization and both personally. Like that weighed on us
Yeah,
pretty heavily because
no one wants to make that call. It's not a
yeah,
fun call to make.
yeah,
And
and also I feel like that's not what the pilots wanted either. So
yeah.
we've been working a lot throughout the winter to make sure that we don't run into that again. And then also
Hmm.
just if you're wondering, why we're not naming names. We're not naming names because we really don't want a pilot who. Our goal isn't to out people for cheating. Our goal
Hmm.
is to enforce a fair spec.
Yeah,
So,
or even accuse them. We were not even accusing them of anything. It just
yeah,
we just this is what happened. This is what we did with it, and we're moving on, and we're coming back better because that
yeah,
same situation can't happen next year.
yeah,
We promised you.
yeah. That's not going to be a thing next year. So,
Hmm.
um, let's get into. Well, actually, hang on. I've got the the wrong results
Yeah,
here. So during that race, it came down to your top four. It was Amari, Heads Up, Shames, and Adrone. Um, Adrone gets knocked out, and then it's Shames, and I think at that point he was just like stoked,
he had
right?
won.
Because he's like,
Shames won.
yeah, he's like, I'm on the podium with the best pilots in the world, right?
Yeah.
That's what it is. These are the best pilots in the world, and I get to race them, and I'm gonna go all in. And he went all in, wasn't able to beat Amari or Heads Up in that next
Hmm.
heat, but like that podium, that's a strong field,
Oh
and so
yeah.
that was a really big podium for Sean. I think that was. I hope it was a very meaningful podium for him
Hmm.
because we put a lot of effort into the season, and he put a lot of effort into being a really fast pilot. He has put that effort in throughout the years, and so big podium for Shane. So he finished out the year in third place, and then second place, the wild card coming in, buying his way in. We kind of joked about it. It was like sort of the Mazepin method, right? Where you didn't necessarily attend the races, but you had what you needed to get to the race.
Hmm.
But then the difference there is like Heads Up is a strong pilot, right? So he
Yeah, there's no
was
question
it was
that Heads
either
Up
him
belongs
or
there.
Amari. It was gonna be one
Yeah.
of them, and they duked it out at the end. Um, and at the end of that, we had Heads Up in second place, which is not something you hear very often, but
Hmm.
something that we kind of got very used to during the season. Amari nailing that first place
First
position
spot.
and
He
ultimately taking the season for himself.
he was the man to beat all year, and he came through um, clutch at the end and got that top spot. That like it was great for us to see because he had been with us all season, and we love like Amari's a pleasure to have on all of our races, even when he brings some crazy quads that totally blow up our rule book. Even that's kind of
Yeah.
fun. Um, and so it was super cool to see. And the battle him and Heads Up had at that last heat, everyone was on their feet watching the race, cheering, and they
Mhm.
were prop to prop for the whole race.
Yeah. It was such a great race to watch. Um, Oh my gosh, I could watch it over and over and over again. So that's your season final. That's our recap. But Mondo brought up there like some of the stuff that we had go on, and I'd like to get to that and how we're
Yeah,
going to be addressing that for 2023. So first, before we get into that, let's go over
let's go.
the updated rule book, and we also have a question
Yeah.
from Mondo talking about the qualifying and points stuff. That's not going to change.
Oh.
We're
Hmm.
pretty happy with our format for the most part. There could be some situations where maybe we change it up to fit a schedule for a given event or something like that.
Hmm.
But we really felt like it was the highest number of packs that you could race at an event where you were directly battling with people who were relevant to your final finishing position,
Hmm.
and well, that was it.
Yeah,
That's what we're trying to maximize,
that's the racing. That's
and
grind and
closest to
props
you in
photo
skill.
finishes.
And
Yeah. I don't think we'll run 12 again. I think 12 was too many. We kind of went over it. But we found our minimum is definitely 6. We like to be 8 to 10 for
yeah,
points rounds. We think that number works really well. And just real quick, just so what's happening for next year, this will be real quick. We are going to run again. We're going to run our Street League season. We're planning on running 4 races in a championship, which is one down from last year, but 1 race a quarter plus champs is a nice pace. But to
hmm
make up for that, because we don't want there to be less Street League racing this
oh
year, there
yeah,
needs
I
to be
forgot.
more, right? There are going to be Street League regionals this year, or not this year, 2023. Regionals will be run by local groups, and that they will be for official Street League season points. So we are working with those groups now, and there's going to be a system where the person who is certifying these races is going to take all the information, the data dumps, the spec checks from that race, and they're going to submit it to all the other people who are running these things and us, and we're all going to everyone is checking on everyone to make sure that the sanctity and the validity of our spec is maintained for these events, and they're going to be for Street League season points. So hopefully you'll be able to go to the closest regional to you, which it could be one race, it could be a series, and then come to one of our events. And the hope is that that'll be enough to get into champs, but we don't really know.
Hmm.
We have no idea how much it's going to take to get into champs next year, but we're really excited to find out. And there should be a lot of Street League racing in 2023.
Yeah, and something else, just so that the pilots are aware, we're going to be taking a big focus also in 2023 of trying to promote and push pilots in their professional careers, even if it's outside of drone racing per se. So we want to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that uh, we're really doing a good job of being stewards of the pilots as best
Mm-hmm.
as we're able to.
Yeah. Well, I think it's time to get into the rule book
Yeah.
and see all of the changes that are happening. The answer is less than you might expect.
Yeah, in a big way, it's like there's a lot more changing here that we'll get into in a second. But
Hmm.
then there's not a lot. We feel like we got a lot of things buttoned down, and really now we're just tightening down the hatches and making sure we're ready to go for the next season. So, um, first things first, we kind of formalized several licenses for the frames and for the 3D prints that
Hmm.
we would ideally like you to be running, just to kind of make sure that the community is staying relatively open. And
Hmm.
then let's see. Next rule.
Yeah.
So we had a really interesting. Uh, we've had a couple interesting developments with frames and how
Hmm.
uh, those have been developing. And so something we realized is that the number of individual segments that attach a motor, it's really important that that be limited. Otherwise, different things kind of start to fall
Or
apart in terms of durability and things like
yeah,
that.
or at least the amount. We're not saying you can only have. So we define an arm segment. It's anything that's attaching a motor to something else,
Hmm.
right? And it's not that like if you want to have six, I don't know, be my guest. But all we're saying is that we're only going to count 3 of those arm segments towards making sure your arms are big enough to be street legal.
Hmm.
Um, and like we're not going to spend a ton of time on the arms, I don't think, because it really only affects you if you're a frame designer. So
Yeah.
I like it affects me and it affects Toker CNC, and I'm sure it affects Mondo at 533 and Shames and Free, but like there's like 10 to 15 guys. So
True.
if you are planning on uh, designing a frame and you want to check that it is going to be street legal, what you can do is if you message us at streetleague.io or DM me on Discord or Facebook or anything like that, I will go through the frame with you and make sure that it will meet all the rules if there's any confusion, and then I will be quiet about it and no one will know. So
Yeah.
I don't when people come to me for that, I don't advertise it. I just I make sure that what you're building is going to be legal so that you can confidently produce it, and then I'm quiet about it. So that's
Yeah.
always the thing. But yeah, so
Um,
we're only counting 3 arm segments um,
those
for
are
that
the only
day.
ones that count towards meeting the circumference rule, which
Yeah,
now is
or is the
called the
perimeter rule now?
perimeter. So
Yeah.
we're calling that the perimeter now. And then the area rule as well. So you have to have 3 segments which hit those, and then if you want to have additional segments, you can, but
Huh.
you do need to have those that hit those
Yeah.
minimum
Uh,
requirements.
let me run through this. Yeah. So it's you can have if you have 4 segments on your arm, we're gonna take the 3 biggest ones and we're gonna count those, and then the fourth one doesn't matter.
Hmm.
Um, And then we have our same perimeter rule as last year, where it is the total convex perimeter. You can see our little diagram with the star and the red lines around it. If you theoretically made a star-shaped piece of carbon for your arm, and then you're like, oh, my perimeter is super duper high because look, I got all these angles in here. Um, that doesn't fly. It
Right.
is the convex perimeter. So if you had a star-shaped arm, we would measure. the red line
Yeah,
in
so
this
the
diagram.
test I like to equate this to, if you want to know if your arm, like if you're holding an arm and you're like, I wonder if this meets the circumference, or sorry, the perimeter rule,
Hmm.
then go ahead and wrap a string around it and see how long that string is. And that's essentially the test that we're running here.
Yeah, and that's at the smallest part of the arm.
Hmm.
And then the this is for people designing frames is significant. It really doesn't make none of the quads that people flew in races last year are illegal for next year.
Yeah, so everything's
They're all
backwards
fine.
compatible going into
Yeah.
2023.
We just closed a little bit of a loophole that we saw forming.
Yeah, so let's talk
Um,
about what happened here that prompted
yeah.
this. So Free showed up to a race, and we have the circumference rule right there. So you have to be able to wrap a string around a given arm segment, and it needs to be a certain minimum. And so what Free did was he took two pieces of arm, and in order
Hmm.
to hit the circumference, he had them separated technically. There's a little 3D print that sat between them, but technically the two arms were considered unique pieces of carbon fiber. So
Hmm.
that meant that he got two surfaces on that inside surface that were counted towards his circumference. And so we deemed that that was legal given the letter of the law at the time. And so now this is us kind of closing that. Um, so yeah, why don't you and
Okay.
again, if you
So
have a rule that you have kind of broken the spirit of the rule, but you were within the letter of the law, we'll give you the courtesy of naming the rule after you. So this
yes.
is the free lunch clause. Why don't you
Yeah.
walk people through it?
So I'll give you the TLDR about it right now before I go into the actual wording because the wording is a little bit difficult. But the free clause is if you have two pieces of carbon that are stacked on top of each other, the the faces of the carbon that are facing each other don't count in your perimeter calculation.
Hmm.
So that's for stacked arms, but that the side effect of that is if your arms are an inch apart, but they are facing each other, those two faces still don't count. But the thing that makes it so that this doesn't make like a frame like the Spec 7, where it's got the A-frame arms, it doesn't make that frame illegal. That frame is still perfectly legal.
Hmm.
So let me
And
get into the actual wording for the people who are designing frames. So it is the surfaces which are occluded by the other arm, so they're covered with respect to the axis of the thrust column, will not be counted in the perimeter calculation. So that is, you have your motor, and there's the axis of the motor where the motor's spinning around. If you look down that axis at your arms and there's any piece of carbon that overlaps another, we don't count the carbon that gets overlapped in there. And there's a little diagram in here that you can go through. And again, if you're a frame designer and you're worried about this, come and talk to me. You know, all those talks are confidential, and I don't leak any frame designs to anybody.
yeah, and the way I like to think about this one is like cast a shadow or put a light source above your frame, and
Hmm.
look at where a shadow is cast, and wherever you see a shadow being cast, that surface is not counted essentially. So that's the idea of the free clause, because
Hmm.
it should button up that loophole that free was able to find, and
Yeah.
yeah. So
But it
um,
doesn't nerf anything. It doesn't make any frames illegal. And there's the one last side effect is um, street legal frames may be assembled in such a way that they fail the free clause.
yes,
If your frame is built in that way, then that specific configuration is illegal. The frame
right,
isn't illegal, but if you build the frame in such a way that it fails this rule, you're not allowed to build
right.
it that way.
So for example,
Um,
if you slap two, if you do the sandwich thing, right, but they're
with the
technically
Spec
two
7,
pieces, but then
with
you
the
tilt the
Spec 7 long
motors.
arm.
If you tilt the
Yeah, yeah,
motors,
yeah.
now it's no longer um, a legal configuration. So
Yeah,
that's
it's
how it works.
yeah, and anyone who's worried about that, if you're just building your frame like the manufacturer is telling you to, like you don't have to worry about this. Just build your frame, go fly it. You're gonna be fine. If you're
Hmm.
designing something new, come hit me up.
Yeah. Um,
Um,
let's see, next one. So 2.4, at any point before the day of the motor's first use in an official event, the following criteria must be met. So this is just talking about um, when a motor becomes street legal. So,
Yeah.
a street league admin must have received a representative sample of the motor for inspection and approval, and it's got our contact information, as well
Hmm.
as we're going to have a spreadsheet on there of all of
Yeah.
the motors that have been verified.
Yeah. So this is a fundamental change that we're making with Street League for this season. Um, to make sure that the validity of the spec is maintained. We're trying not to make it too difficult for manufacturers to get into it. We want to make it easy for manufacturers to get into it. We want more parts.
Hmm.
But just to, so everything that people raced last year is basically getting grandfathered in.
Hmm.
And so if you raced a part last year, it's legal this year. But if a company is coming out with a new motor, it's very easy. Just contact us, say, hey, we need an inspection for our motor, so you can add it to the list. And that is true for props and is also true for batteries. From now on, everything
Hmm.
from last year is getting grandfathered in, and anything new that comes out just needs an inspection. We got to have a representative sample in our hands.
Hmm.
Um, and we don't need a million of them. If it's a motor, couple motors, if it's a battery, couple batteries, no big deal. Um, and we're gonna inspect that. We'll approve it. We'll put you on the spreadsheet. You're good to go. And then if there's ever any question in the future about, hey, should this motor be legal? We're going to compare the motor to the one that we have in our hands because we
Hmm.
were sent that part before it became legal, and that will just be our reference part. So, and that's just something we're doing to protect the validity of the spec going forward as we get more popular.
Right. Um, yeah, so if you have a motor you want to run, go ahead and contact us.
Hmm.
If you're not sure if it's already been sent, should be on the
Yeah,
spreadsheet if it's already been
yeah.
approved.
There's
But
a
if you see one
spreadsheet.
that's not approved, go ahead and let us know that you would like to get it approved. And if you are the manufacturer of said motor, go ahead and send us a set, or anybody can. But we just want to make sure that we're doing things like actually checking stator volume and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, just to make sure
propellers.
that the numbers on the outside are the numbers on the inside. Because one thing we've
Yeah.
really learned this season is nothing sacred.
It's yeah, no spec is sacred until you
No
actually
spec is sacred.
measure it.
Yeah, you got to
So
measure it.
yeah, and we kind of took a similar approach here in 4.1, but a little bit
Hmm.
different. So for propellers, we're expecting propeller manufacturers to work a little bit more closely
Yeah.
with us. So a street league admin must have received a representative sample of propellers from the manufacturer for inspection and approval. Please contact us. The difference here is that we're looking for the manufacturer to contact us. Not just anybody can submit a prop and say, "Hey, I want this one legal." Um,
Yeah.
we're we're going to be working closely with the manufacturers to make sure that the prop is within a similar performance envelope.
Hmm.
So that's something that we're
Yeah.
working on formalizing a little
And
bit more.
yeah, and we don't want like every company makes even just in the 7-inch props like 5 to 6 different props, and like we don't want 12, 20 different props in the spec league in street league. It's just it wouldn't be fun,
Yeah.
right? So and then it allows us to limit it like HQ is only getting one prop that's legal, and GemFan is
Hmm.
only getting one prop that's legal. And if Azure wants to get in on it, like they will only have that one prop that's legal.
Right.
If in the future those props get updated and they're like, hey, we want to stop making this prop, it's kind of antiquated, it's not really what we want, would you be interested in us changing to a different prop in the future? We can work directly with the manufacturer to make sure that any prop that we make um, legal for the spec is going to be very similar in performance. Um, and then we would phase out their old prop and phase in their new prop kind
Yeah,
of thing.
and Bumper asked a really good question in the chat. Are legal parts locked down for the season, or new parts approved along the way? So we've been doing our best to make sure that we approve parts along the way, and really it's at the race during check-in that we're verifying that whatever you brought is legal. So yeah, that's a great question because um, it'd be easier for us to just lock it down, but
Yeah.
I think it works a lot better for the pilots to just verify it as the season goes on.
Yeah, so it will change. We're trying not to do anything too radical on you.
Hmm.
Um, like there nothing's gonna happen where you're flying a part one week and then the next week you're not allowed to fly the part anymore.
Yeah.
Um, where
Um,
it's if new stuff's coming onto the market, um, it'll probably get approved before you even know that it's coming to market, right?
yeah. Speaking of new stuff, another addition to the rule is in addition to the HQ 7x4x3, we are
Mm-hmm.
super excited to announce that the GemFan 7x3x7 70
737.
yeah 7030 is now a legal propeller for the season. So if you want to test the set out, go check out GemFam's website and
Yeah.
grab a set, see what you think of them. Um,
It is
and
the
yeah,
7037. That's not a typo. They label theirs differently than HQ.
yes. Whenever I'm going from one brand to the other, I always goof it up. But um, yeah, GemFan 7037 is now a legal prop for the
Yeah.
2023 season. So really excited for their partnership.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's
They're
going to do a lot of good things for spec drone racing.
Yeah, and they're worth trying. Obviously we flew a lot of them. We did a lot of testing before we made that legal.
Hmm.
Uh, but they are definitely worth flying. Like, get yourself a set, try them out, see if you like them. They are better in some ways. They're worse in some other ways.
Yeah,
But we're
we're gonna
we're
let the
very
pilots
excited to
figure
have.
that out.
Yeah, that's for you
That's
guys to figure out. We're not going to tell you anything.
yeah.
Besides that, we flew them and
We make sure
we
they're not gonna break anything, right? They're not
yeah,
gonna
they're not going to break anything. They're not going to start smoking your batteries. All of a
yeah
sudden, this prop just melts batteries, but
or
it's
be
fast.
the gas but not very durable, things like that. we're,
Yeah,
we're really looking for like glass cannon type stuff. And pro dangles, yay, new prop colors, yes.
yeah.
That's
Let's
one of the
go.
things that excites me the most. We're finally going to have some more prop colors.
Yeah.
um,
Uh,
so let's get into the spicy stuff. This
the
is
spicy
kind of what I've
stuff.
been waiting for all stream
Yeah.
long,
This is
and I
the
think
big
what a lot of
punchline of
people
the
have been waiting
stream,
for.
guys.
So 8.1.
Hmm.
This whole section used to be a bunch of rules related to how you have to motor output limit your quad and how the spec checking system worked and a bunch of software settings and stuff like that. We're getting rid of that, right? We saw that it was good enough to host the season. It was not good enough to hold up to the top 1% of pilots really pushing the spec, because
Hmm.
those guys are even closer than we were able to achieve in terms of like how closely we can regulate this. So,
Hmm.
um,
It's
super
all
excited
gone.
for this. It's all gone. All of it, we
They're through.
erased it all. It's now three separate rules. So, uh, 8.1 is the flight controller must use the official Street League firmware to operate the drone system. Reason for
Hmm.
that, there's a firmware coming soon, and the download will be available soon. We're hoping to drop that in the next couple days, if not tonight,
Hmm.
possibly.
Yeah.
Um, 8.2. The FC and ESC software and hardware must have D-Shot RPM telemetry enabled at all times,
Hmm.
um, and they must be available to test throughout the event.
Hmm.
8.3. ESC firmware must be marked by its developer as a stable release. Custom hex files are not allowed, and once we get through a couple more ESC firmware testing stuff, we're going to be
Hmm.
having an official list under here of
Yeah.
approved ESC firmware.
Yeah.
But expect for the time being for that just to be BL Heli 32, as well as BL Heli S, and I believe Blue Jay will probably end up making it in
Yeah,
there as
probably
well.
Blue Jay, probably AM32. But yeah, right now we're just doing official. We just have to finish up some testing. We'll get it done before the beginning of the season. Just because there's like five BL Heli S
Hmm.
firmwares, and if one of them is broken in some way, it could mess up a lot of things. So,
Yeah,
but nothing crazy. All your ESCs from last year, you'll be able to fly them.
yeah.
Everything's fine, guys.
So, and so we're gonna kind of come back to that and what that means. Um, we're gonna get through the
I
last
mean,
thing. I think there's the last thing
I mean,
here.
I yeah, we got like
Okay,
two
we
more
got two
things real
more
quick,
things.
and then
We'll,
we're gonna come back to this and talk about this firmware and
yeah.
how
Okay.
cool it is and what it does.
Yeah, so
Uh,
last two rules here. We changed Shark Bite to HD0.
oh,
Again, thank you to them for sponsoring
hmm.
our championship last year. And we have banned the DJI O3 Air unit until further notice. I don't think it's really going to be compatible in a racing situation, so I think that
uh,
is on DJI to come up with a system that we can use a little bit more for
Use.
racing.
The normal area DJI is not banned. The normal air units we have, the
Yes.
community has figured out how to facilitate those at races, and we're happy to do that.
Yes.
We're not sure what's happening with the O3, and it seems like it's doing really weird stuff. So we're just like, once the drone race community has figured out how to facilitate racing with that, as
Hmm.
long as it's not too crazy,
Yeah.
we
So
will
the
we will
original air
allow it.
units are still allowed.
Yeah,
It's specifically the O3 air unit that
yeah.
is not allowed.
Um,
And then our last little bit here, this is flying above the maximum height of a flag element will result in a missed element if there is any reasonable doubt that the flag was not completed successfully. So basically, this is removing your benefit of a doubt if you fly above the maximum altitude of a flag.
Flag.
So if you want the benefit of a doubt while you're flying, make sure you are below the flag surface.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if it comes into question, it's likely that it will not be counted as an element. And this is one of those things where um, I think it gives the race director a little bit more precedence
Okay.
to say, look, please just fly the course in a way that we can regulate. Um,
Yeah.
so, yeah,
If there's any question, the answer is you missed it, bud.
Amari
All
likes the
right,
flag rule. So
let's get
let's
into this
rewind here.
RPM thing because the chat's going a little. We got some chat about it.
Yeah. So you'll notice here there's no RPM mentioned. Um,
Mhm.
the idea here is that we've worked really closely with Infinity, who has helped us come up with the Street League firmware. And the Street League firmware has a new feature we're calling RPM limiting. And the idea is that it will map a desired RPM based on your throttle input. And
Mhm.
for this season, we're specifying that throttle or that RPM maximum at 100% throttle to be 13,000 RPM, and
Mhm.
any throttle position you have in between that will be the appropriate RPM. So we've
Yeah.
got a really exciting video that we're gonna run here at the end. Um, but I think unless
Yeah.
there's anything else you want to say before we run that.
So so Mondo asks, is the target RPM that staying the same? So before we didn't because it was a throttle limit and a motor output limit. Really, what we were trying to do was power limit the quad, but even that
Uh,
didn't work
we were
perfect. Um,
KV. We had
we
a
were
target
KV.
KV.
We were
We did not have a
KV
target RPM.
equalizing. Yeah,
Hmm.
we were KV equalizing the quad. Um, so and what the previous RPM right off the line, right when you punched it, you could hit about at the end of the season, you could hit about 15 to 16,000.
Yeah.
However, last year and the beginning of the season, it was right around this 13,000 RPM number. So
Hmm.
really what we did is we took the quads from the end of the season and we just made them fly like the beginning of the season. And the
That's our
quads
goal,
that
at least.
everyone was flying at the beginning of the season, their quads basically won't change.
Hmm. Yeah, and that was the really interesting thing. You see a couple of our veteran pilots commenting. So like, yeah, Imperius saying 15,500 RPM. That's generally what I saw as well. I think I saw a couple people hit 16.
Yeah.
But like in Moberly, for example, Sean was saying, look, my maximum RPM is in the 13,000 range, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
um, he felt like maybe we could do something a little bit better to make sure that even if you have a slightly smaller motor, stuff like that, that at very least you should be able to hit the same top speed. And so we did a
Mm-hmm.
lot of testing to try to make that come to fruition going into the Colorado race and then into champs.
Mm-hmm.
But it did really push us to like start looking for an honest solution to
Yeah.
improving the top speed capability of the drone, and we again we do encourage for the drones to be different because we understand that that's sort of just the reality of anything the pilots build are going to have variance in them. They're going to have aerodynamic differences. My battery might not be as good as yours, but if nothing else, it would be really cool if we could say everybody's props are spinning the same speed while they're
Mm-hmm.
traveling in a straight line, assuming you built the quad decently.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah,
You still
I'm
have to
pretty
have a good
excited about that.
tune. Like a good tune versus a bad tune will still make a difference.
Hmm.
Good arrow versus bad arrow will still make a difference. But all of those differences kind of condensed a little bit,
Yeah.
is what we've noticed from our testing. And from my personal experience with this testing, the only difference you feel in this quad between a good battery and a bad battery is how long you can fly.
Yeah.
The quad flies exactly the same at launch and at the end of the battery, and it flies the same on a good battery or a bad battery. The only thing that changes is how long you can be in the air.
Yeah, and the video will kind of show a little bit of this, but I feel like I maybe wasn't able to capture it quite right when I was filming and whatnot, but we were really hit by the fact that it feels like a sim. It feels like a sim with no battery drain. Like
Yeah, there's
that
no battery
is,
sag anymore. It's
yeah.
a thing of the past.
It's what's interesting now is that you feel the battery drain as a result of your PID controller becoming less capable of maintaining an attitude, which is kind of an uncanny feeling. Um, but again, it's more minute than what you normally notice when your battery starts sagging, and you get a lot better consistency when you're coming down in those split S's and whatnot. It just performs a lot better. Something to note is that like during these flights that you're about to see, motor saturation, where the motor's hitting any given motor is hitting 100% RPM or 100% throttle, it's very rare. So we're now not really asking for much more than like 80 or 90% at max of these motors, which means that they're going to be able to spin the prop the same throughout most of the maneuvers. That's kind of where we're at. So I'm really excited to show you. Is there anything else that I forgot?
No, I think we play it, and like I'm gonna sit here and look at the chat, and like after the video, if there's anyone hanging out asking questions, we're happy to answer questions.
Yeah, so we'll run the video and then we'll come back for some questions. So here we go.
Yeah.
What's up, everybody? Sky FPV here with Street League Drone Racing, and in just a moment I'm going to be joined by our resident engineer, Lead Fingers, and we're going to be demoing some of the new tech coming to the 2023 season. Ultimately, we're trying to be as die-hard spec as we possibly can, really because we care a lot about bringing all the different brands into this. So with all that said, how do you make spec racing good? Because the obvious flaw here is, well, okay, if I'm running these motors and you're running those motors, the better motors will win, right? And that's something that we've been kind of taking a crack at in Season 1 of Street League, but we're really going to hit it with a hammer here in Season 2. So with the help of Infinity, we've created a new firmware, and that firmware is going to have the ability to limit the RPM of the motors. It gets a little more technical than that. We're actually using a PID loop in order to make sure that the maximum RPM that we desire is being hit. We've been seeing that across brands and equipment. Ultimately, this has been a huge benefit to bringing the racing much, much closer, regardless of which quad you choose. We'll still have to choose something that's appropriate for the spec, but it's going to make a lot less of a difference than it did in 2022. Without further ado, let's get into it. We're going to do some testing, some flying, and we'll talk a little bit about our different setups and see if we can really notice some big differences between the quads. Here's what our next test is going to be. We've got two quads that are set up to 1,200 grams, and Steve is going to run a crappy old battery, and I'm going to run a relatively new-ish battery. And then we're going to swap, so we should see the biggest difference that could exist between these two quads.
All right, I'll go. 3, 2, 1, go.
I'm already getting low battery warnings. That's how crappy this battery is. I'm just going to ride it out and see what happens.
I'm going to dip in behind you on the straight.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, dude. Can you slow down, go through the chicane so I can catch up?
Okay.
All right, I'm on you.
Oh, hello there. I I've not stopped getting low battery warnings, but she's still sending.
She's doing it.
In my heart, I don't believe that this quad is going to fly for 2 minutes, but we will see, because it does not feel any different than it did when it started. Ooh, interesting. Okay, so I got my first land down for just a second, and I noticed that the quad felt wobbly, but the throttle was still doing what I wanted. Okay, so now I'm getting land now. I'm just gonna murder this battery and bring it on in.
Dude, no change in top speed.
It sounds the same in the straight.
Got my first low battery. Yeah, dude, you were on land now. I was at 3.5, and like the top speed didn't change.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, dude, I can't tell a difference on the top speed. You were literally on land now, like, oh, I'm bringing it in, and I'm chasing you down this at 3.5, nice and solid, and it's the same thing, just a little bit of walk.
It's interesting because this is the worst battery I owned, but I just got to fly for 2 minutes before I got to land now. So that's really awesome. So essentially, this is the beginning of the year quad for last year. This is much closer to what the end of the year quad would look like. You have the X Novas, you've got the Kari, you've got skinnier arms, which we found made a several mile-an-hour difference. And now this thing is competing again, I think. So we're gonna run another battery and see what it looks like.
Yeah, we're hoping this will nerf the super fast guys and not the normal guys.
Yeah, the normal guys I don't think will feel a difference.
Yeah, that's the goal, right?
On go.
3, 2, 1, go. Pulling in space.
Interesting.
Not crazy, but noticeable. Take this next section a little slow. I want to get in front of you for the. Alright, you ready?
Yep. Oh yeah, you're going pretty fast. I'm gonna try to catch you anyway. We'll see what happens.
Okay, you're right there, dude.
I mean, I'm having to work for it really hard, but this quad is competitive again. Which it was not, I would dare to say, before.
Yeah, I did not see you in those turns, which means you are right on that.
Oh, I can't quite catch you.
Catch me, that chicane's that fucking good. Good luck, bud. Oh, there he is. Holy shit. Holy hell.
Oh,
all
no,
right,
I
first
couldn't
low
do
battery.
it.
2 minutes, 9 seconds.
Same here. I need to go easy on this quad. It's Rhiannon's.
Sorry, Rhiannon's for science. All right, persistent low battery, at 230, 244 volts.
Same here. Oh, just got my land now. Bring it it in because these are one of my nicer batteries. Woo, that was fun. I want to say a huge thank you to Infinity for working so closely with us on the RPM limiter. He did a really amazing job in just being responsive and getting all the features that we really needed, as well as I think other racers will need. A huge thank you as well to the Betaflight developers, because cool features like this wouldn't go into really awesome software if it wasn't for open source. So huge thank you to all the people who contribute to that. I also want to say, go ahead and subscribe because it helps us out, first of all. We appreciate it, second of all. And third of all, we're going to be posting all of our live streams for all of our races this season, as well as all your updates for the state of the spec. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
All right, so that was our demo of the RPM limiter. I we've been pushing really hard to get that out, so I'm hoping it'll be available for public download in a little bit here. But that's kind of where we're at. Go ahead and now, if you have any questions about it, we'd love to answer them on stream. But we'll also be available in Discord as well as Facebook if you're wondering more about it. But ultimately, like what you were seeing in there in the video there was, it wasn't exactly the set point. I wished in hindsight that I had been logging the actual set point for the RPM limiter, but it was a throttle scaled, so it was very similar to the actual set point of the RPM.
Yeah, because it's and like for setting, like just to start, how do you set up your quad with this? Well, thanks to Betaflight Unified Targets, it's super easy. There's going to be one separate hex for each kind of CPU, like F7, there's like two F7s, there's a couple F4s kind of thing. And it's super easy to do. You take your current Street League quad and you dump the quad. You flash this new hex. You put that dump back on your quad. You remove your throttle limit. You remove your motor output limit. You go fly. That easy. Really fast.
So that whole section of the rule book, we dropped all of that. It's basically flash, weigh it, and fly for the most part, assuming you're coming from last year. So pretty excited about that. And I think I want to make sure that there's not any misunderstanding, like what this is in particular. This isn't necessarily going to make all of the quads exactly identical, but it is going to bring them much closer to each other. And I think that its use case eventually will be even further outside of just Street League stuff. I think this will be a really useful firmware for people. But for us, we feel like it really did a good job of bringing down the gap in straight line speed. So I still think the bigger motors are going to be a little bit of a play, and we'll see, like maybe people will find some ESC settings or whatnot. But ultimately, in all of our testing, it's made the racing closer than it was before with our previous methods of running the spec. It also makes sure that the spec checker is not even part of the equation. The software that does the spec checking is essentially running on the drone, so we don't really have to do anything, and the pilot will know what their drone is going to do at the event. So assuming they've flown it before the event. So ultimately, I think it just makes the spec a little bit more repeatable for a given setup, for a given pilot. And then also, I'm really excited because what we noticed was that the difference in battery performance was the only thing that it seemed to affect was how stable your quad was, which you could technically tune.
Which you were noticing that. I didn't, but I run really high PIDs on my quad. So like I'm probably a little over tuned with the fresh battery.
And my PIDs are just not tuned that great. But it was interesting because since they weren't tuned very well, I noticed that as the battery got weaker, they were even more wrong. So I think if I go and tune my quad again, then I probably will see that less. It wasn't anything more than what I was used to flying in general. So I think that should be fine. I noticed the prig that I was flying there was tuned a lot better, and I did not notice it as much on the prig. So I think really the same thing kind of applies, right? Like tune your quad, make sure it has decent aero, do all the normal things. The main difference here is that the exact kV of each motor doesn't matter, right? Binning motors isn't
Mm-hmm.
going to help you a ton. Um, Having the absolute freshness of the fresh battery, I don't think is going to matter as much. You might still see something in the turns, but
Yeah.
what I noticed was I literally took the worst battery. I actually just flew last night on that same battery. It was the first time flying it since this test, and it dropped a cell. That's
Mm-hmm.
how done that battery was. That was a 1 to 2 year old battery. I think it might be a
Yeah.
2 year old battery that I was racing on.
That's what I was flying. My pyros are from 2021, man.
Yeah. And like for
And
that test in particular, you were running a newer battery. So you were running one of
yeah,
your nicer batteries and I was running the worst battery I had. And you
yeah,
guys could see what the result was.
I have batteries that I flew all of 2021 for everything, and then there were my practice batteries that I flew every weekend for 2022, and then I have batteries that I only flew during races in 2022. Those are my two different ones.
Yeah.
Um, and is basically as long as there is enough voltage to get that motor up to
Mhm.
or to get all four motors to that average RPM, because it's not on a per motor basis, it's on a per quad.
Right.
So the quad can distribute the RPM wherever it wants,
Mhm.
but the average between the four is maxed out at that 13. As long as
Right.
there's enough power in the quad to hit the RPMs that the pig controller is telling it to, the quad will fly the same. So if you drop a cell or you have super tiny motors that just can't spin the prop and things like
Mhm.
that, like you might see things starting to sag out. But like if you have a normal street league build, your quad's just gonna be able to spin the motors exactly the same as everyone else's,
Yeah.
and that's really the goal.
Yeah. So I think this provides a really good framework for our spec going into 2023. I'm really excited to see what people think about when they fly this. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so if you have a given experience with it once we release this, go ahead and let us know because we really want all the
Yeah.
feedback as early as we can get it. So I think now is going to be your opportunity to try it out, and it'll be the software spec that you just flash it and go. So
Mm-hmm. And bidirectional D shot on now, guys. Can't
yeah, now
even if
that
you
is a
don't want
requirement.
RPM filters, you got to run bidirectional D shot.
Yeah, that is true. So thank you so much, Led, for co-hosting with me today.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you to all of our pilots for a wonderful 2022 season. And we're super looking forward to 2023. We got some big things in store. We're going to be announcing our first race here shortly. So be looking for that within the next week or so.
Mm-hmm.
And be looking either tonight or tomorrow. We're going to be dropping the firmware so that you can try the 2023 firmware. So thank you so
Yep.
much for joining us, and I'll see you guys next time.
See you guys.
All right, and we are muted. We're going to let the stream catch up, and then I'm going to end it. Yeah, I think he's going to be gassed about this.